Alright. Hi everyone. This is not going to be scripted at all, so if you don't like me doing unscripted things, by all means, switch off. I will not be offended whatsoever, but we need to talk about the fact there is an active misinformation campaign going on right now, and it's really, really annoying. And I mean insanely annoying. It's stupid because you can just Google it and you can tell it's not true. What am I talking about? Well, if you go onto any website or web page about any, warships that aren't from the United States at the moment, you're going to see these comments every single time. Specifically, you'll see it in the Royal Australian Navy and you'll see it about the British Navy. Now, of course, the British Navy is commonly beaten into it a lot, and fair point. It's gone through the ringer, and it's not one particular political party's fault. They're all guilty of it in the UK. Maggie Thatcher is actually really guilty of it. Everyone likes to defend her for the Falklands, but why do you think they nearly didn't have aircraft carriers for it? It was her. And if you really want to look into it, Max Hastings wrote in the start of his book on the Falklands War all about the little political machinations that Thatcher was going on with to try and get the islands away from Britain and give them over to Argentina. She wanted them gone because she saw them as a waste of money. Thatcher is responsible for this. She sold HMS Invincible to Australia, and we had already paid for it, and we were about to commission it as HMAS Australia when the Falklands started and Britain bought it back. See, this is not a new thing. You can thank Thatcher a lot for it, but there are other people, of course, that are guilty of it. And also the fact that you're not an empire anymore. You're just not. You haven't been an empire since technically 97, but longer than that. Now, the reason I bring this up is because there is a particular reason why it's happening. I am, of course, referring to the little escapade in the Straits of Hormuz. Now, to preface with this for the little special pelicans out there, I don't like the Ayatollah. I don't care what happens to the Ayatollah. I think he should be removed and that whole regime should be consigned to the dustbin of history for what it did to the history of Persia and the Persian culture and just in general what has occurred to it. When you study ancient history and you actually look into Persian history and you realize that most of what the Greeks said was crap and the Persians are actually incredible, you realize just how disgusting that regime is. And that's before you even get into the horrific things it's done to women and students and just in general people. So yeah, not defending the Ayatollah. Haha, you got what you deserved. I do not like the reason why, because if you are kidding yourself to think this is being done for the right reasons, then, well, I have a bridge and a waterfront villa in Alice Springs near Uluru to sell you. But I digress. Now, I've said a few months ago now, I think it was, when I put out the video about that stupid battleship that is apparently coming, that it's the dumbest thing on the planet because the US Navy needs frigates. It desperately needs frigates. It's not even funny how desperately it needs frigates at this point. Like you could get rid of half the Burkes and replace them with about a dozen more frigates than you've gotten rid of in number of Burkes, and the US would arguably be better off. It is that desperate for frigates. You could trade 3 aircraft carriers for frigates, and the US Navy would come out on top. It is that bad. Anyone who was in the US Navy in the 70s, 80s, and 90s when they had frigates will tell you that today, that's one of their biggest problems. They need frigates. It's just a fact. You need a cheap ship that can be expendable, because frigates are expendable at the end of the day, and can escort vessels and just do the job of a frigate. A destroyer can't do it. A destroyer is busy. It's got other stuff to do. You can't commit a destroyer to a frigate's job because it's a waste of resources. There's a reason why China is building a lot of frigates. It's just common sense. And, the same as every other country in the world, except for the United States, because they can't agree on a design, because every time they pick a good one, they break it. Anyway, because of that little escapade that began without a plan, because it seems to just be, we'll do it on vibes. Today it's going to end. I'm going to blow up the infrastructure. Oh, wait, no, tomorrow I won't do it. It's stupid. But because of that, the US Navy has been laid bare to the fact it cannot defend the Strait of Hormuz. I personally don't think any navy could, because it's such a narrow choke point that it's next to impossible to keep a choke point like that open, short of a complete ground invasion of the southern coast of Iran. And I'm just going to address this by putting a map that I created on screen about what it is like to invade Iran. You can see this whole bit here. Yeah, he's no bueno. Anyway, the point of I'm making is that frigates could theoretically keep the Strait open, but they're going to take hits. DDGs could keep the Strait open, but they're going to take hits. You can't risk a DDG to keep the Strait open. It's just not a fair trade. If a cheap frigate goes down, it goes down. Who cares? Like, yeah, sailors are going to die, but that is a brutal thing about naval warfare, is that happens. That is a normal thing when it comes to naval warfare. It's horrific. You don't want it to happen. Obviously, I don't want people to die to try and keep the Strait open for oil. But when it comes to escort ships, they are expendable. There is a reason why during the Battle of Okinawa, they were used as radar pickets when they knew the kamikazes would take them out. Escort ships are expendable. That's their whole purpose. And it's a screwed up thing to think about, but it's true. Now, when the other countries, the ones that have been bullied for not doing anything and, being useless and then threatened with invasion over one of their allies, those ones, when they refused to help with a war they didn't start, that they didn't want, they were then called cowards. But what quickly happened after that was a misinformation campaign that is stating, oh, we don't even have ships to send anyway. There's no ships to send. There's no ships to send. And I just want to thank the Royal Australian Navy for deciding to be founded 125 years ago for me to make this argument. We just did a fleet review. We have them. There are 3 air warfare destroyers, which are smaller than Burke's, but they fit the role quite well, called Hobart, Brisbane, and Sydney. They would be perfect in this role. There are also the Anzac-class frigates. There are 7 of them in Australian naval service. There are 2 in New Zealand service. 1 is in refit. And then we get to Japan, which has the crap load of new Megamis, its older frigates, its smaller destroyers, which technically are considered large frigates. The Royal Navy's got multiple frigates and some destroyers. And then you've got the French Navy, and then the Italian Navy, and the German Navy. If you actually do the math, and I'm not kidding, if you actually do the math, and you even pump this into an AI and it'll tell you the figures. Europe alone outnumbers the United States in terms of hulls on the water in escort ships. It doesn't outnumber it in carriers, of course not. There are 5 European carriers in total. Technically 7, but I'm not counting 2 of them because they're quite small. But there are 5 European carriers. So the US obviously outnumbers them there. Like, that's not even an argument you'd make. It's stupid. But in terms of escort ships, Europe does outnumber the United States, and it's because of this mismanagement. And then we get to this moron. And I'm using the term moron kindly here, because the words I have to say about this man from the academic side of things, because, I am one of those. This would be where I hold up the fancy pieces of paper, but I don't want to dox my surname. Yeah, he made this video today. I know what you're doing, Marky Mark. You're playing to an algorithm, but what you may not realize you're doing, or you possibly do because you're that kind of person, you're feeding a misinformation campaign. You're feeding a very evident misinformation campaign because you were very selective in what you said, because I watched your video, buddy. I watched the whole thing. You talked about how the Royal Navy has more admirals than ships, which you quoted as a title of a video. No, it doesn't. It doesn't, and you know it doesn't. It has 40 admirals, or flag rank officers. There are about 63 active ships in the Royal Navy, more if you count the RFA, which I don't know why the RFA isn't part of the Royal Navy at this point. Everyone else does it, but sure, whatever. Then you come back and go, well, it's fine, because they're just active ships. Forgetting that ship classes are built to classes for the specific reason that maintenance periods exist. You then make a big hullabaloo and song and dance about how Britain only has 1 aircraft carrier because the other one is always in refit. That is normal. I cannot stress enough, the reason you quite often see ship classes in 3s and 6s and 9s is because only a third of them are ever meant to actually be at sea. That's normal. Like, it just is. That's how ship classes work. That's why the 4 V-boats, one of them will probably always be in refit. Do you actually think the US Navy runs around with all 11 carriers at once? No, that would be stupid. Right now, the John C. Stennis is an extremely long overhaul. along with other carriers. And then you have, of course, the Lincoln and the Ford, which are off the coast of Iran. Well, the Fords had to pull back, but the Ford will now go into refit. It will have to because of the fire, but it's been at sea for that long and has to go into refit. It will go into refit, and another one will come and take its place. That's the point. Like, refits occur. Do I agree with you that the numbers for Britain are too low? Yeah, duh. Like, that's not the argument you're making, though, is it? It's making that it's a shocking navy, but you do that without acknowledging any of the other facts. You completely ignore the fact that Britain is in the final stages of outfitting its first Type 26 frigate, which it's planning 8 to replace the 7 smaller frigates that are left. And then on top of that, the second Type 31 frigate, HMS Active, has just hit the water for the first time. On top of that, you bring up the fact there are only 6 boats in the submarines, that is boats, of the Astute class. Britain is planning to replace them with 12 from the AUKUS class. It's not like Britain isn't aware of the screw-ups it has made. It's happening. It's fixing it. The Royal Australian Navy is in the same boat. We've had successive governments, shout out to Malcolm Turnbull and Abbott and Morrison and also Gillard. Yeah, you're responsible too. Both parties are responsible for not replacing the ships that we needed back when we needed to start replacing them. The Anzac class are outdated at this point. Well, they can hold their own. They're not great, but for the job we're talking about, they're fine. They're getting replaced with the Hunter class and the new FFM. We announced that we're almost doubling the size of our escort fleet because of this. And then we're replacing our subs, with nuke boats. Like, this is not something that people are blind to. People are rearming. People are building it again. It's just the fact that you're trying to get little clicks out of this, and you didn't mention a single instance of this. You did not bring it up at all because that would detract from your little propaganda message. You're feeding into the narrative and the propaganda thing. I want to try and give you the benefit of the doubt that you didn't know you were doing that. But you're not a stupid person. I've read your PhD. Because I have. You can find this stuff online and, through academic circles as well. I've looked into what you have published and what you have done. I've read it. You've written some pretty decent things. You've also made some certain other things up, and I question where the hell you got the information for the things like the silver plate Lancasters, buddy. Want to know where you got that, and where some of the other scripts came from. But at the same time, basic historiography. When you look at something that is happening, you have to look at everything. You can't just pick and choose what you want, otherwise you just become a propagandist. There's a reason why in my hour-and-a-half Belarus video, you don't see me shying away from the fact that people from Belarus joined with the Nazis. I talk about it, I address it. My History of Ukraine series right now that I'm talking about, I actively am writing the period about where you have the UPA, and they joined with the Nazis and then fight against them, and it's a whole other thing. You can't just pick and choose parts of history that you like. That's not how this works. It's something you learn in the first 3 weeks of your undergrad. It's the most basic thing that we learn in the academic space. And yet, you do it all the time. It's disgusting. It is beyond disgusting. And somebody with your credentials should know better. Unless you're doing it for political purposes, in which case you know exactly what you're doing. So the thing is, I make no mystery of the fact I am very pro-Ukrainian in this conflict. And that doesn't come down to politics. That just comes down to my inherent belief that people have a right to exist without getting blown up. Like, basic shit. That doesn't mean you can't criticize. That doesn't mean you can't talk about the bad stuff. It is our job to talk about the bad stuff. Like right now, I'm writing a video about a certain part of Soviet society where I'm talking about the fact that certain parts of it were far more advanced than in the Western world in terms of civil rights for women. And then I also contextualize it with the bad stuff that was happening that put the Soviets behind the Western world. You can't pick and choose, mate. You have to pick all of it. You don't get to sit there and make stuff up. Because at that point, how are you better than ancient aliens? You're not. But it's not just him. Like, it's others too. The MAGA crowd is horrific for it. Every single comment you go onto a Royal Australian Navy post, there is a concerted misinformation campaign to either put us in this war and at the same time say we can't join it because we don't have ships. It is non-stop. They're doing it to the French as well, stating that the French are weak, they're cowards. They've been doing this since 2003. How they changed the name of French fries to Freedom Fries because the French didn't get involved in the Iraq War. Just because your allies don't follow you into a war doesn't mean that they are cowards. It means that they don't want to be into that war. It's not a hard concept to fathom here. And you want to know why it's not a hard concept to fathom? Because the United States didn't join the Second World War until it absolutely had to. It did not follow its allies from the First World War. It went fine, we're isolationists now, we're not involved. You can't have it both ways. It's ridiculous. Like, you look at this from the big picture. Genuinely, big picture. If you go and just look at the ships in these navies around the world, you'll note the French Navy is one of the most powerful on the planet. It just is. France is incredible for what it's done with its navy. It's planning its submarines for the 22nd century right now, and it hasn't even finished its current class of submarines with the Barracuda class. It's building a new class of frigate, which is phenomenal. It looks like it's going to become a very popular export model. Sweden seems to be eyeing it up. Greece has already got one. Greece is getting 3 more, I believe, off the top of my head. It could be 4 more. I'm sorry if I'm wrong. The Royal Navy is building the Type 31 class. It's already exporting it to Poland. It's exporting it to Indonesia. And I believe there are talks with New Zealand. New Zealand will either go with the Australian option of the new FFM with the Mogami class, or it will go with the Type 31. Probably the Type 31, in my opinion, if it turns out to be cheaper, if the new FFM struggles and lags, which it might after the first 3. Then there is also the Type 22, obviously, which is being built by the Royal Navy, Royal Canadian Navy, Royal Australian Navy, although the Royal Australian Navy's Hunter class is in a bit of a state right now. It is rebuilding, but you don't mention that. And the one other point he makes is he brings up the River class OPVs. And I agree, they're very hard work. They're all around the world. Do you really think that's not normal to have a small portion of your fleet be the battle fleet? He carps on quite a bit that in the Royal Navy, only about 1/3 to half in certain circumstances would be considered the battle fleet. I've got something to tell you here from someone who, done a lot of work with boats in terms of the study of them. That's normal. That's insanely normal. Now, I want to bring up World War II, and I want to bring up the Age of Sail. During the Second World War, the Royal Canadian Navy and the Royal Australian Navy grew to be some of the largest navies on the planet by the end of the war. They did. They were huge. The active battle fleet of the Royal Australian Navy at the end of the Second World War, when it was one of the biggest in the world, was 2 heavy cruisers, 1 light cruiser, and 1 really old light cruiser, and then a couple dozen destroyers. Over 150 ships, by far the majority of the fleet, escort ships. In the Royal Canadian Navy, more than 95% of its fleet at the end of the Second World War were escort ships. They were not battle fleet ships. The United States Navy, exactly the same. The majority of it was not part of the main battle fleet. Same with the British Navy. In general, that's just how navies work. Majority of the ships are not mainline battle combatants. They're just not. Because there's no point for it. There are jobs that the other ships have to do. When we go back further to the Age of Sail, when Britain had its massive empire to manage, and France too, and hell, we'll even throw Spain into this as well, small ships made up the majority of the fleet. It's actually covered really well in the first Master and Commander Jack Aubrey Maturin novel. It's called Master and Commander. Now, it is a work of fiction, but it's historical fiction, but it contextualizes it very, very well. Where you see that Mahon, the Port Mahon, is full of small craft, like sloops, HM sloops, like the Sophie. And they go in and out, doing convoy work and raiding cruisers for merchantmen, that kind of stuff. The reason why I bring that up is because that is the situation for the majority of history during the Age of Sail, is that you have your mainline battle fleets, but they cost a fortune. Even the Royal Navy at its height didn't operate as many first rates as you think it might have. It wasn't that many. The majority of its fleet were third rates, third rates, and fourth rates for a while, and then it turned into third rates, particularly for the battle fleet. But the majority of the Royal Navy was frigates. There's a reason why the US Navy was so successful when it built slightly bigger frigates, is because frigates did the majority of the work. Put a frigate into a line of battle with an actual surface combatant that is designed purely for surface duking it out, a frigate will get ripped in half within a broadside or two. Again, small ships are normal, and he quotes the fact that these river classes don't have anti-air weapons. Yeah, that's true, but again, that doesn't dictate it away from the previous role of these small ships. This was completely normal for the time period. There is nothing a frigate could do short of running away that would keep it alive, and in many cases that wouldn't work because the moment weather came in, a heavier and larger ship would be able to use its weight to get through the swell to catch the frigate. HMS Victory famously did this. It was faster than other ships that were smaller than it just because of the way it was built. That is a fundamental reality of naval warfare, is that quite often you just have ships that will not survive, and they will not be able to live in a combat situation, in a high intensity combat situation. But you didn't mention that, did you? You intentionally or unintentionally didn't mention it. Because it's really easy to read articles like The Sun, isn't it? Yeah. It's great to base your opinions off news articles without actually contextualizing it. The Royal Navy has a problem. It does. It's not big enough. It simply isn't. He's right. But he ignores all of the context behind that and the fact that it is being fixed. It's not something people are blind to. Give it 10, 15 years and it'll be fixed. The thing I don't think people get is that ships don't just go bang, they're there. They take years to build. Like, yeah, it's a long time. It's not just a case of, building an outboard out of fiberglass. It's not. They take years, sometimes decades, sometimes multiple decades. US aircraft carriers take a very long time to put together, and so do modern destroyers and modern weapons. That is a reality of the world, but it's so obvious you're doing it for views. And you present yourself as a PhD expert historian. Yeah. Yeah, I don't have much more to say to that. I suppose you do say you've been on the History Channel, so I guess the shoe fits.